Okay, so it's 2 o'clock and we're going to get started with our Cattle HQ Live. I'm excited for those individuals joining us today. Just to let you know, you probably already have seen this, but to ask your questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat, and we will gladly answer them at the end, or I shouldn't say we should say Dr. Daly will gladly answer them at the end. And so our speaker today is Dr. Russ Daly, and he is going to talk about potential options for weaning those calves and some things to consider. So Russ, I will turn it over to you. And if you want to share your screen, we'll be ready to go.
All right. Let's get things going here. Excuse me while I push all the right buttons.
I can see your screen.
All right. So we are sharing what we need to share, Julie. Are you okay?
It looks good to me. If you go to the next slide and it doesn't work, I will interrupt you.
All right. I think we're good. All right, so yeah, thanks for having me on this Cattle HQ webinar. I'm Dr. Daly. I am the Extension Veterinarian here at SDSU. I'm glad to have you guys on, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation about a timely topic for this time of year, trying to get to calves introduced into the feed yard. Um, Probably going to have more of a emphasis on more the bigger question about calves in general. I know a lot of people will be weaning your own calves into the feed yard. Some of you will be purchasing calves. So what I hope to do today is to kind of give you some food for thought for no matter what situation you're in, and maybe think about things from a higher level vantage point than maybe you've done in the past. I know that people here on the webinar have done this before, and you've got your routines that you go through. But sometimes, we have differences in the types of cattle that we're dealing with, have differences in year to year timing and weather and that. So hopefully this will give you some food for thought for whatever situation you find yourself in. So to me, getting cattle into the feed yard, it's all about those transitions. And you think about a calf that's out on pasture, nursing its mother, and getting up onto feed, that is a huge life change for those cattle. And anything we can do to make those transitions smooth. And sometimes we just need to think about backing off on the stressors, because the stress, if we don't do that transition well, the stressors are what's going to come into play. So what is stress? The body's reaction to anything that disrupts this equilibrium. We go through stress. Our kids go through stress when we see a new group of people, or we're a new kid in school for the first time. But cattle are undergoing the same kind of thing. So the stress that they're under is an interaction, or that we're under too, is an interaction among the central nervous system, processing that new change in their environment and their situation, affects the endocrine system and the hormones, and it does have an effect on the immune system. So our connection with stress when it comes to cattle, and other animals for that matter, is that long-term stress interferes with the immune system. And for the calves entering the feed yard, that immune system, the decrease in the immune system really leads to bovine respiratory disease. That's the main number one cause of things that we're dealing with. So, stress we might think about in terms of us. I know, students this time of year are relatively stress-free because they're kind of in the middle of the semester. But I'll tell you, once we get to finals week, the stressors come on, and that's when we have the colds and the flu come in, and it's no different than the cattle. So we want to manage those transitions so that we have as little stress as possible on those animals. Well, what are we talking about with stress? Psychological stresses. So we don't think about cattle and psychology very often, but cattle do have physiologic, psychologic stresses. Crowding, into smaller areas than they're used to. A big thing here is mixing with different animals and the commingling that we often have to do sometimes, especially when we're purchasing calves. Every time that somebody is added to the group or animals are mixed together, we kind of sometimes discount that social stress that goes in to that group dynamic. So every time that a new person or new calf joins the group, we have the pecking order that has to be sorted out, and this happens all the time, whether we realize it or not, and that is a huge prolonged stress on these animals. Weaning, shipping, especially when it comes to the length of the transport. Painful procedures that can consist of or have persistent pain over time. And these are definitely things that we see when animals go into the feed yard, or the different feed, different place to get water, unfamiliar surroundings. And these all contribute to longer stressors. So the longer the stress is, the more detrimental that is to the immune system, and the number of simultaneous stressors. So you do all of these things at the same time. We're restraining animals after we ship them. We're maybe if we castrate and dehorn them right on arrival, and we're throwing at them all these feed changes and banging the trailer doors. And then mixing and crowding, all of those at once. That's a more profound stressor than just one of those in its own right. So when we do all of these things at the same time, the more we can spread out these stressors, the better it's going to be on the immune system, and the healthier an animal we're going to have. So I think probably everybody realizes too that not all calves that we bring into the feed yard are going to be they're created equal. You've got calves that are just weaned right off the cow, maybe coming in and we're trying to get them started, or we've got calves that have been on feed for a while, have been backgrounded, or maybe we're buying them a little higher weight and older age. So age and the weight, their previous immunity, all there's no two groups of calves that are the same. And so using that knowledge or that information about what is it about these calves that we're going to try to start managing that transition into the feed yard? What is it about them that's going to govern our choices about how we treat those animals coming into the feed yard, and how we process them and what we do for them? So that's where we get into this concept of risk assessments. And so this isn't necessarily something that you sit down with a checklist or a rubric and you make a determination on every set of calves. But what we're trying to do here is just have in mind the high risk calves. And what I mean by high risk is the high risk at having problems, having basically pneumonia issues later on in the feed yard, illness issues, versus low stress calves, or low risk calves, I should say, that we will have less of a chance of those kind of things. Some work that has been put out by some feed yard veterinarians and researchers. This risk categorization has been determined to be the single most important predictor of morbidity or sickness. What risk category they're put into, and we know that cattle that are classified as high risk, we have more first treatment failures. In other words, when we give them an antibiotic to get them over their illness, that treatment is more likely to fail in higher risk calves versus lower risk calves. So it makes a difference how we classify those calves coming into the feedlot and what we do for them. So getting into that in a little bit more detail, how do we put we got some calves in front of us, how do we put them into a risk category? So here's some of the factors that have been singled out, especially by researchers, surveys of feedlot veterinarians, about what do they look at when they figure a group being high risk or low risk. So definitely the single source versus commingled. We talked about the social stresses. Calves that have been together all their life as one group, and that's all they that's the only group they know are going to be less prone to have problems and stressors, versus groups that have been commingled and put together from a lot of different sources. Group size. The bigger the group, the more risky you're going to have. The higher the risk that you're going to have a calf in there that's going to be causing problems. Transit time to the feedlot, weight and age. The higher the older calves and the heavier calves are going to be lower risk. What is their weaning status? Did they just get weaned? Is that another stress that we're adding on to this whole transportation and new environment scenario? The preconditioning status goes along with that. Have they been started on feed? Have they been vaccinated already? And that gets into the vaccination history. We know bulls that haven't been castrated and are coming into the feedlot that way and have to be castrated after they arrive. They're at higher risk. How much shrink is on that load coming in? Are there sick calves that come in already? Are there sick calves coming into the feedlot in the midst of that group of calves that are coming in? And that goes along with the fevers on arrival. So calves that are showing those signs of illness already, those are definitely indications that here's probably the tip of the iceberg is those calves, and there's a lot more that are going to get sick here later on if we pretty soon if we don't do anything. And then, a huge thing right now is the value of the calves. These calves are bringing top dollar now, and that means somebody's paying top dollar to bring them into the feed yard. Um, Maybe we're going to, take that into consideration and treat these animals a little differently because we know that the risk of a loss is going to be much more detrimental economically now that we have high value calves. So that enters into it too. In a way, we could look at we're talking about risk for the calves. We're kind of looking at risk for us too financially when we're talking about the value of the calves. Another example here. So this is actually on the drug bottle label for a drug called Baytril. There's some uh, generic equivalents of Baytril out there now. But anyway, this is a antibiotic that's approved for something we're going to call something called metaphylaxis. We're going to get to that later. But right on the label, they do a little bit more specific job of here's some examples of conditions that may contribute to calves being at high risk of developing BRD. So transportation with animals from two or more farm origins, getting back to that commingling, extended transport time, environmental temperature change. I didn't mention anything about environmental stresses, but calves going from that's one reason why calves from the south are at higher risk coming up here than native cattle because there's temperature changes involved. There's climate changes involved. So the temperature change during transportation, change in range in temperature fluctuation, wet or cold weather conditions, environmental weather stresses. And we talked about shrink. If we process on arrival, castration and doing with painful procedures, or if they've been exposed to other animals that have shown illnesses. So these are even more detailed uh, criteria put out by the drug company, basically, that gets to what are high risk calves and what are low risk calves. So taking those into consideration. So I have I have some scenarios here, and I know we're not really set up very well for unmuting your mics and getting into a conversation here. But think to yourself. So here's a scenario. You're in Kimball, South Dakota. It's October 20th. You've got a potload of calves coming into your feed yard, hauled in one stretch from Joplin, Missouri, quite a ways away. Um, Fairly lightweight calves. You got bulls, you got heifers, you got steers, you got some with horns. Lots of different ear tags and lots of different colors. This is obviously a put together group that has a very high likelihood that there's been a lot of commingling and a lot of different sources. Those animals have seen probably a lot of stops along this way before they get to your place. Pretty significant shrink. In several calves coming off the trailer, they're already droopy, they're coughing and breathing hard. Boy, we got some sick calves right off the bat. So I should also say that some of the feedlot veterinarians get very detailed with high risk, low risk, and ultra high risk or medium risk and those kind of things. For this purpose, for the purpose of the day, let's just talk about where you would classify them as low risk or high risk. I'm hoping as you think about this, you're seeing this scenario that these would be considered high risk calves, right? So this is going to help inform us on what we're going to do with these calves once they get to our feed yard. Here's another example. Um, Coming into your same feed yard in Kimball, South Dakota. This is a single source of calves, one ranch outside of Miles City, Montana. So it's still pretty far away. But they've been weaned on the farm before they got to your place. They've been preconditioned 45 days. October 20th, they've been hauled to your place. So they got a little more weight on them. Got steers and heifers. The bulls were banded at birth, so you don't have any bulls to deal with. A little less of a shrink on arrival and no signs of illness on arrival. So would you call those low risk or high risk? You're thinking about the categories or the criteria that we were considering before. You can go, I mean, you could go either way, and some people would, some feedlot operators would say, yeah, these are pretty low risk, they're a single source, there's no commingling, they got a little age on them, they've been preconditioned. We don't have to worry about bulls in here. Nobody's sick on arrival. You could make a pretty good case that these are lower risk calves. But on the other hand, you might look at that same criteria and you could very well say, well, these are coming from a long ways away. And it's a long trip. Maybe it depends on a little bit of the weather situation when you get them in. What's it like on October 20th? You could very well call them high risk yourself and treat them that way. So this one's kind of in the middle, and people could disagree on how to classify them, but it does again get back to what are we going to do to these animals on arrival? So here's the third scenario, feeding your own calves, weaning, you've weaned them, you fence line weaned them for a week before moving them to the feedlot. Um, you gave them branding time vaccines back on May 15th. You gave them pre-weaning vaccines and you processed them. In other words, castrating and dehorning, did everything you need to do before they were weaned. You did this out on the pasture. You put them back on the cows. This is definitely a situation where you are in control and you know what's been done to these animals. This one ranch, one source got a better chance of knowing how those animals were treated. This situation, you have no idea what these calves have had and how they've been treated, but you can make some assumptions, right? But this situation, what these calves are all about. So these would definitely be um, lower risk calves. So I mean, it depends on what this risk categorization really depends on the calves. So why does that make a difference? So the gist of the talk, the rest of the talk is going to have to do more with processing and what we do to those animals. So why does that risk category, high risk versus low risk, make a difference, and what does that mean practically? Well, here's some of the decisions using that risk status to manage the incoming calves. So do you process them right away when they get to the feedlot? Do you provide them metaphylaxis? We're going to get into what that is. Do you vaccinate them on arrival? Do you put medication in the feed or water? So the high risk versus low risk uh, groups of animals, we can answer yes or no to these different questions. So here's some of the things. So I'll go through these items more one at a time, and then we can kind of see where we fall with the risk categories. So first of all, that processing on arrival. So what I mean by that is how we've got to do some things to these calves to get them ready for the feed yard. Do we run them to the chute right away after they get off the trailer, as they get off the trailer? Or do we wait a while? So one of the rules of thumbs that I've heard from different producers, and maybe you guys have your own thoughts as well, is after they come to your feedlot, and this is a little different for those if you just are feeding your own calves. Um, for every hour they've been on the truck, letting them rest at least an hour for every hour they've been on the truck, so you're not running them right through the chute. Think about those additive stresses, and if you give those calves a little chance to catch their breath, it's going to be it's going to be a good idea. This resting time, you could be 24 to 72 hours. We're going to talk about some situations even that might even be a little bit more. But it does depend on the processing um, treatments that you're using. Some of these things we're going to be okay with waiting for a while. Some of these things we want to get into them right away. And by right away, the biggest example of that would be this metaphylaxis, which we'll get to on the next slide. I'm probably going to skim. I'm gonna skim over a very important part of getting calves into the feed yard, and that's this basic care. No matter if you're weaning your own calves into the feed yard or purchasing animals, um, what do you have set up in the pen for them on arrival? Making their water tanks prominent so the calves can find the water. Most of those calves are going to be dehydrated as they come off the trailer, and they're going to need to rehydrate themselves. So the not only prominent, you can put tanks along the fence line. Calves are going to stumble across them as they walk the fence line more. If it's a big lot, running some water out on the ground so they can hear and see the water coming out, so they can know where the water is. And you guys probably know your own tricks for getting calves to find the water tanks, but making sure there's plenty of it available, that there's enough space around the waters, or there's enough capacity to handle the number of calves that you're bringing in. Most people would say, on arrival, let's not get too fancy with a ration. Let's just give them something scratchy for their rumens to get going on. So putting grass hay in the bunks, making sure they're finding the bunks, and then providing enough bunk space. And then just, if they've been on a long haul, just that comfortable bedding, and plenty of it, making sure they have a good place to lay down and rest and recuperate after that truck ride. So this is maybe as or more important than some of the stuff I'm going to talk about even, but it can't be understated that those are really important ways to acclimate, right? Manage those transitions, right? So the better we can manage those transitions, the less stress we're going to have on those animals. So what is this concept about metaphylaxis that I'm talking about? And you've probably, people who have done this before, who are on this webinar, probably have done this. This refers, and metaphylaxis is a veterinary only, an animal health only type of term, but it's when we give every animal coming off the trailer basically a full dose of an injectable long-acting antibiotic. And I'll give some examples of what those antibiotics are on the next slide. What we're doing here, so this is for high-risk calves, right? It's something that we would reserve for those higher risk groups, because we might have some clinically ill animals that are there off the trailer already. So this injectable long-acting antibiotic is going to treat those ill animals, but also it's probably more important for those subclinical animals, those animals that haven't had the chance to develop the coughing, the fever, the respiratory signs yet. So preventing illness in those subclinical animals. So we're giving everybody the same shot. The reason why we reserve it for higher risk calves is that no matter what group you apply this to, you're going to have a fairly constant percentage. And this has been held out over a lot of research and a lot of stats from feed yards, is you're going to reduce your illness rate in maybe up to half. So if you're going to have, in a high risk group of calves, if you're going to have a 20, 30, 40% illness rate or morbidity rate, it makes a lot of economic sense that we're going to cut that in half. You got a low risk group of calves, then maybe 1 or 2 or 5% are going to get sick, and you're going to give this antibiotic to everybody, and you're only going to reduce you cut your sickness rate to 2% or 3%. Well, then the economics aren't necessarily there. So that's why we reserve this metaphylaxis usually for higher risk groups of calves. And so what I've got here, this is not any endorsement. I don't think any of these really work any better than the others. But these are drugs that have on their label prevention and control in this metaphylaxis label on them. And now some of these generic drugs are getting a lot cheaper over time. This is, these generic ones have dropped in price since the last time I checked. But some of them are up there pretty hefty, and that's why uh, it's an economic decision that does carry some weight to it. But all of these do have some long durations, and the spectrum here, what I mean by this is what the germs that the label says that they are able to take care of. So notably, Mycoplasma bovis, that's a tricky one. And so some of these drugs have that on their labels where others don't. But they're all pretty good drugs, and they're all prescription drugs. So we have to make sure that we know that we're using a veterinary client-patient relationship in order to get a hold of these drugs. That question about, and I mentioned, I don't really care which one you use here, in which one, and they all work kind of the same. We do have some research that would, and this is a study where we've done, where people have done what we call a meta-analysis. We've gone and looked at all the studies about how well they work in metaphylaxis type of protocols. So it'd be antibiotic protocols for BRD. And you see that here's the ones that seem to be ranked higher, and that would be the Draxons and the Baytrils, Nuflor. But you also see, this is getting to be kind of old work. So you see some pretty wide bars here. And this is because, they really hadn't tested these drugs much because they hadn't really been out on the market very long. So if we did this today, 12 years later, some of these might be up higher on the list. But there's some evidence out there. A lot of the evidence comes from our experience and your veterinarian's experience with using them too, as far as what choice to use. But all are labeled for BRD, respiratory disease control, and they're all relatively long acting. But they're all usually, something we reserve for the high risk calves. So that's why, one reason why we would want to make sure that we're having that risk status in mind. So metaphylaxis for sure, but what about some other management strategies for using these risk status categories? Vaccination decisions, the feed grade antibiotics. These are some of the things that the feedlot vets have used these, and I'm not going to talk about too many of these. BVD PI testing. Do you take ear notches out of these calves on arrival? How often you're pen checking them? Do you delay processing? Paying attention to pen size and separating groups, and how are you managing those groups? So these are examples of other management strategies that feedlot operators are using based on the risk statuses. So that risk, high risk versus low risk, comes into play on these different decisions. And I'm gonna cover some of them in a little bit more detail. One of these big things is vaccination. So what do you give these calves on arrival at the feedlot for vaccines, if anything? So we're usually thinking about things like the respiratory viruses, the 5 ways, the respiratory bacteria. So we'll have like the once PMH types of shots that cover Pasteurella mannheimia, giving clostridial vaccines too. So what are we using? But also maybe what are we doing as far as timing of these vaccines? So this has been an interesting um, source of research over the past decade or so, where people are looking at this phenomenon of, do we give them a shot right off of the trailer, a vaccine? And a lot of times these the ones that are studied are the modified live 5-way viral vaccines that contain your IBR, BVD, BRSV, and PI3. So this is an example of a and it's really not too much of a drive that the calves were transported to the feedlot. Half of them got vaccinated on arrival, so right off the truck. Half of them, they didn't vaccinate them until 2 weeks after they were in the feedlot and up on feed. So they found that actually delaying that vaccination meant a better weight gains early on in the feeding period, and better what they call seroconversion to IBR. So the vaccines worked better. Um, and so the decision to delay vaccinations was really based on these researchers felt that um, considering the calf stress levels. Okay, when we give that vaccine, what is their stress level? Are they coming right off a trailer from Joplin, Missouri, all put together, and their cortisol levels are very high in their systems? In those calves, that vaccine is just not going to work very well, and that's what they're seeing here in those calves that were vaccinated right away during stress. And I know sometimes you think it's a race, you want to get that into them. If we think this vaccine is going to do them any good, we want to get it into them as soon as possible so it can start working. Well, if we're giving that vaccine in the face of stress, and high cortisol levels from all these things that are happening in these calves at that time, they're really not going to work very well. So we're really kind of wasting our vaccine in that case. The other thing that researchers have shown or looked at are calves on an increasing plane of nutrition. So a vaccine is a drain on those animals' immune system. It's not, I mean, it's meant to boost that immune system, but what I mean by that is it takes protein, it takes energy for the body to respond to that vaccine. And if you're still got a calf that's still having a tough time finding the feed bunk and not maybe not drinking very well, not eating very well, that calf might not have the nutritional wherewithal to respond to that vaccine. So that's probably another reason why these delayed vaccine calves did a little better, is because they're nutritionally able to respond to the vaccine a little better. There's one more study that I put up there, and they're basically delaying their vaccine in this study by 30 days. They found actually fewer respiratory disease retreats because, again, they were not stressed. The vaccine was given to the animals when they weren't stressed out. And so here's another. I think the big takeaway from this is in that third scenario where you have the control over your calves, um, getting that vaccine into them as soon as pre-weaning or as far back before the stresses of transportation and weaning and acclimating to a new feed yard, getting that into them well ahead of that stress is really going to be the way to go. And if you have to, if you're worried about their previous vaccines, looking at the stress level of that calf coming into the feedlot, and maybe just keeping the vaccine in the fridge for a couple weeks until you vaccinate them, is going to be a better way to go. Now, this has to do with respiratory disease vaccine and respiratory outcomes. We can make a case. We can talk about clostridial vaccines here in a little bit too. And those are things that we'd want to make sure that those calves do get doses of that into the feedlot period as well. So risk categories, high risk calves, are they going to respond to vaccines right away? I'd say probably, my guess is probably not as well as we'd like. So that's one way that we can use these risk categories into determining what kind of processing we're going to do to these calves right off the bat. So, whoops, I'm going the wrong way. That's why that is happening. All right, so other things that we might want to think about. Do we give internal parasite, external parasite? Do we castrate them and dehorn them? I'll talk a little bit more about these. Definitely, this is something On high-risk calves, we'd want to delay as much as possible until they're doing well. I know it's very tempting to want to get that done right away. Implanting, I'm going to delay. I'm going to defer um, that topic to people who are more into the implant programs, but we oftentimes will want to do that. Again, kind of the same with vaccines. They've got to be on a good nutritional plane to be responding to those implants too. So delaying those might be something to consider as well. And we have veterinarians who advocate for mineral injections. That might have to do with their risk tolerance and risk categories as well. All sorts of different things coming up, and we don't have the time to really go into some of these um, other treatments, but some of these things are being done to calves with the goal that that's going to help these transitions, right? That these calves are going to be better performing as they transition into the later part of the feed yard period. I think for the purposes of right now, we got to consider that every time through the chute is a stressor on those animals. And so, waiting and delaying these things as much as possible probably is going to be better for those calves and better for those things to actually work. Doing it again. There we go. Deworming calves in the feedlot, depending on what their status is, coming off a pasture, have they been dewormed before? Calves are going to bring worms in from the pasture. Once they're in the feedlot, these stomach worms that we worry the most about, they're going to be really pasture related. So we're not going to, once they're into the feedlot, the circumstances just aren't right for the worms to really develop and transmit from animal to animal in the feedlot. So deworming them coming in with an injectable, longer lasting type of dewormer. The macrocyclic lactones are probably the more popular ones, and those are the ivermectin and doramectin. Sometimes we might think about combination injectables, combining them with white wormer and oral wormer. It's probably a subject for another webinar, but in most cases, we're going to want to clean out those calves, especially if they're coming off of pastures and haven't had it done before, that the worms that they bring with them from the pastures are going to be detrimental to their feeding. So that's usually going to be a good idea. The question is, when do you do it? Probably not a big hurry to do that if you have high-risk calves, but it's something you want to get to eventually. This part of the world, we might have to worry about lice, or we do worry about lice for some cattle more than others. All sorts of different treatments that we can give to those calves coming into the feedlot that way. I would say, whether it's injectables for sucking lice or the porons, these types of products are more popular all the time. I would say this is maybe something, depending on when your calves are coming in, that this is something you could sure delay. We know from our previous experience that, and the calls I get as an extension veterinarian is, as we get into winter, that's when we get the calls about lice. And it comes back to the fact that we give lice treatments usually too early. So, definitely this time of year, in September or even October, the lice aren't really active, and we're really not knocking them back too much. And these products we give them, most of them don't really have a lot of residual activity, even the injectable ones. So delaying that until we're getting into more November, December, when those lice are becoming more active, is probably going to be a good idea. So that's something we could think about delaying as well. And so the questions I get have to do with reinfestations after, hey, we gave these animals the poron, we gave these animals the injection, and now they're starting to rub and they're starting to show some signs that they're being affected by these external parasites. So this is something I think we could probably delay. So I want to get back to these scenarios here. And again, I don't know, we don't have the interactive capability here with this webinar. But thinking about what we talked about with the different things that we do to these animals, we determine these are going to be high risk calves. So my thoughts, I'll just put them out there and you can have your own thoughts as well. Remember, this is the lightweight calves coming in long ways away, lots of different combing. We got some calves that are sick already. I'm going to definitely provide them some metaphylaxis, and that's not something I want to delay. I want to give them a little rest coming off the trailer, but we got sick calves and we gotta get that into them pretty soon. So I'm not going to wait too long to run them through the chute. And I know that's a stress running them through the chute at that time. Another one they don't probably need, but that metaphylaxis is going to outweigh the benefits of that are going to outweigh that stress coming through the chute. I would be an advocate for not even vaccinating these calves right away. And which vaccines, if you were going to give them anything, maybe you could give them a 7-way. Clostridial, I'll just say too, BRD vaccines definitely something that are helpful. I think they're more helpful when they're given pre-weaning and before they even get to the feedlot. But the clostridial vaccines, enterotoxemia, the overeating disease, those are vaccines that probably need boosters through the feeding period if you're feeding these calves all the way out. These are probably good candidates. Yeah, at some point, we're going to want to get them dewormed. At some point, we're going to probably want to treat them for lice. I'm probably gonna wait with that. What else? These are calves I'm going to want to double down on my good bedding, making sure they've got water, encouraging them to use the water tanks. I know some, might even put some flavoring in the water to get them to drink. There's electrolytes. Some of those things can be used. Just doubling down on that calf care um, in these cases is gonna pay off, and the metaphylaxis probably right away, but the rest of it, I would advocate that probably want to wait until we get these guys going good before we worry about a lot of these other things that are important. We don't want to not do them, but we can probably um, delay them a while just in the um, in terms of getting having their stress relief before they have to respond to these things. Here's the one single source that we thought maybe, well, it could be low risk, could be high risk, depending on, I guess, your risk tolerance. Um, Metaphylaxis, I think that's a question mark. That could be something that you might want to do if it's depending on the weather forecast maybe and what it's like when they get there. But in general, these are going to be lower risk than that first scenario for sure. I think there's less of an issue probably with these guys. In getting that shot into them. Again, if I was going to do it, I want to do that um, pretty, um, pretty early on after they have a chance to rest and get into uh, their feeding period. Vaccinations, you know, this is an opportunity to be able to learn a little bit of and know a little bit more about those calves. If they've been preconditioned, including some shots, I don't know. As far as the BRD stuff, they might be good. I might not even worry about them at all, or I delay the vaccines, and I wouldn't have any qualms about that. I probably want to keep up on my Clostridials, my 7-ways, and those going forward though, because those are vaccines that don't tend to last a long time. So that comes into the vaccine choices a little bit. Here's if they haven't been dewormed coming off the pasture when they were preconditioned, that's information I'd want to know. If they have been coming off the pasture and they've only been in a dry lot since you've got them, there might not be any reason to deworm them again. Lice treatment, we could do that. But this is going to be an example of a group that's going to be a little less needy when it comes to uh, vaccinating these animals. And definitely, here's a situation where you know what these animals have been through. So I'm not going to worry about metaphylaxis in this case. I'm I think again, this is a situation where they're going to be good because we know that they've gotten that vaccine. But I'm going to want to keep on with the 7 ways and booster them periodically throughout the feeding period. Um, I'm going to want to deworm them if I haven't done that. If I didn't do that, well, probably wasn't probably not a great idea to deworm them on the cow out there on pasture because they can still pick some up unless you gave one of those long-acting dewormers. So I'm probably going to want to do that. I'm going to treat them for lice, but I'm probably going to delay that until the lice are a little bit more active. And what else is just providing that good transition to the feed yard. So finally, just thinking about what we're doing here and what we're giving our calves and why becomes really important. Um, it's easy for us to default to what we've always done, and that might be fine if it's worked for you in the past and you get the same kind of calves into the feedlot, whether it's your own calves or calves that you've purchased somewhere else. Same time of year, same conditions, and you know that your program's working. I'm not here to say that you should change things. If you do think about changing things, in terms of, okay, maybe we've got a little higher risk group now that we need to worry about. Having that chat with your veterinarian is going to be really important. And I think this is really important as well as thinking about how stressed those animals are and how high risk they are, and in particular in terms of whether vaccines are going to work on arrival. I think we're learning a lot more about the stress that these animals are under, and the fact when they're under a lot of stress, the vaccines are not going to work as well. And I'll be honest, I'll be the first one to say in practice, I broke that rule a lot before we understood more. It was in my mind, I really wanted to get those vaccines into those calves as soon as possible because I knew the clock was ticking and I wanted to get them to work. But in some of those groups that I vaccinated, I'm pretty sure that there's pretty low uptake of that vaccine by those animals. So I hope this gives you some food for thought about what what decisions might go into receiving calves into the feedlot, whether they're your own or purchasing them from other places. I know, from a veterinarian standpoint, I'm very product and processing focused. I sure wouldn't discount and think about. I would think very closely and work with your veterinarian and extension people about what are the non-product ways that we manage those transitions, especially when it comes to stepping up animals onto feed, water availability, bunk space, bedding, windbreaks, those kind of things, just as important, if not more important than the other products type stuff I was talking about. So I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to silence the phone that's ringing here in the background. And then see if we have any questions.
Yeah, so if you have questions, I know Russ would love to have the challenge of your questions. They can be specific to your own situation, or just wanting more details on something. So if you have those, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A or the chat features. So but while they're thinking, I was thinking, Russ, so we do the calf value discovery program every fall, and last year I think I had 11 producers in it. And so I don't know this is right, wrong, or indifferent, but every time we take the temp on every steer as they come in, and I always question when we have a calf that's now been hauled, I'm going to say 5 hours or 4 hours or 3 hours, whatever, and I'm expecting a temp. Don't get me wrong, they're nervous, they're upset, they're whatever. Part of me wants to say there's no need to give them any drugs. You know what I mean? And so I just kind of want your intake on that because I'm always willing to learn new things. So, what's your take?
Yeah. So I think you hit on it. My take is, and I think this is borne out by a lot of feedlot vets and people who do a lot of pen riding and treating calves, is that body temperature is not by itself a great predictor of whether they have BRD or not, because there's so many things that can influence that. You mentioned the activity, the stress level, black-hided calves on a hot day, that kind of thing. But if that's in conjunction with another sign, like a cough or droopy ears or something like that, definitely, definitely that would be some indication that um, uh, treatment would be in order. And I personally, don't get too worried about body temperatures until they're over 104. So that, but then again, this is where previous experience comes into play too. And if you've done this years and years and we haven't treated them, but then they get sick later, those same calves with the body high temperatures have gotten sick, then that might inform my decision to go, okay, well, based on what's happened in the past, I'm going to give these guys a shot of antibiotic.
Yeah.
But that's a real gray area, coming from a few hours away, it's not good. But the age of the calf and the weight of the calf and what they've had before, um, can really help play into some of those decisions, I think too. But it's not like we just don't have a rubric where we just check off if they need this and this and this. You got to use some experience, and I think it's almost more of an art than a science sometimes, to be frankly honest about that.
I firmly agree with that because we certainly have producers that are amazing with high stress cattle, and we have producers that struggle with low stress cattle. So, yeah. So we do have a question for you in the Q&A, and I don't know if you can see it or not, Russ. Um,
Yes.
so I'll let you read it so that, and then because the rest of the people can't see it, just us.
Yeah. Okay, so a group of calves come in, appeared to be low risk, didn't give any metaphylaxis on arrival, and then a few weeks later they begin coming down with BRD. So that's not that wouldn't be an unusual situation. So you begin treating individuals, but more and more are breaking. Any suggestions on when to quit treating individuals and just treat them all? That's a age-old good question. Is, okay, we've gotten up to a certain percentage of the herd that we've had to give them shots, and at what point we just bite the bullet and treat everybody. Um, so rules of thumb. So you got rules of thumb out there. Once you've hit maybe about in most cases, they'd say 15 to 20%. If you've gotten to that point where you've treated that many calves out of the lot, then it's time that you should just go ahead and treat them all. Some of it's going to depend on what that treatment is, is it something we can easily medicate water for? Is it something we have to run everybody through the chute? I guess in my experience, those in that kind of scenario, it typically comes down to running everybody through a chute because you're getting calves that are really sick. Um, so yeah, the 10 to 15%, would be a rule of thumb. And whether it's on the lower side or the higher side of that might depend on some of these other questions about how can we get the medication into them? What's coming down the pike for weather, and how easy is it to get the treatment into them? So there's the rules of thumb out there like that. And I think you talk to 5 different vets and they probably have 5 different numbers, but somewhere around that, 15%, 15-20% maybe. It all depends on kind of what's um, your how trigger happy are you, and some of these other considerations too, cost and labor, and that all goes into it too. But generally, yeah, you get to a certain point where um, the ones you're treating in these groups of calves are just the ones you're seeing clinically are the tip of the iceberg. You've got so many more that are just incubating that disease, and maybe they're not going to get sick, but the next day you have more of them. So at some point, it does make a lot of sense just to go in and treat them all. That's a really long, vague answer to something that should be a very, very clear-cut number, but good
Well,
question.
I think Russ, to add to that with the value of the calves now, this is
Mhm.
Julie's opinion, not a veterinarian's opinion. So let me clarify that. I might pull that trigger earlier because of the value of the calves, just
Exactly.
because, and that's
Yep.
wanting to line my own pocket, but
Well,
that,
that's another consideration, and so yeah, that's just another example of, I think we'd all like to have the checklist and the 15% number or whatever, but in so many of these issues, it's trade-offs, and other factors that come into play. So, but yeah, I don't disagree at all.
yeah. So if there's any other questions, please don't hesitate to put them into the Q&A or the chat. I know we can stay on for a couple more minutes to answer those, but um, yeah, the reality of that is with calf prices where they're at today, you really question where you should start being, how much I don't want to say extra you can put into the calves or how much more precautionary things you put into the calves to justify them. So, as you were going through the various things, but I still, in my gut, and it's not all medicine, it's also how those cattle are handled, how they're dealt with, and all those things. And I just go back to the low stress handling and those kind of things that can make such
Yeah,
a huge difference without me pulling out uh medicine bottle and
yeah.
such.
Yeah, I mean, so the value of the calf is higher, so it would make you want to pull the trigger on metaphylaxis, maybe now it makes more economic sense to keep one more alive or to keep them performing because there's going to be more pounds that I can get benefit from. But I'm guilty of having this bottle on the shelf mentality when these animals are so valuable now, it's time to double down on the low stress handling and all the non-medical things, the bedding, the windbreaks, everything we can do. That kind of nutrition, huge, that's going to be so much more profoundly effective, I think, in the long run, or overall, I guess I should say, than maybe what vaccine or what antibiotic we want to choose.
Yeah. Well, and I just even go back to the point, and I know we have a couple people talking about it on in December, but even ensuring that those calves get their colostrum at birth. And I
Yeah,
understand we're talking about calves that I might bring in as well as those that I might be home raised, but the reality of that is that colostrum has such magical powers. And
yeah,
so I just think it's a whole picture, and I think sometimes we just maybe get a better focus of it when the prices are good.
yeah, and I agree. And again, it's not just the cost benefit, looking at the tangible costs of that antibiotic, but the cost of our time too. It's worth more of our time now to spend
Yeah,
with these animals
yeah,
and do some of these other things. So that's a good way
yeah.
to look at it.
Well, I don't see any other questions, so we thank you, Russ, for your time today. We greatly appreciate it. Next month will be Dr. Baker and Dr. DeHaans. That will be talking about data to help management decisions. So basically, they're going to be talking about some data that comes from basically our fetal programming and such. And so maybe that how we manage that cow as we go. So we thank you for your time today. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Daly at his email or such, and he will gladly get back to you. So thank you and have a great day.